that there are white people, and then there are practices of whiteness. And you don't necessarily have to be white to have the ability to practice whiteness. And I grant myself permission. There's nobody who can give me permission outside of myself to borrow. I think that the luxury I have in being a Black woman in America is that I get to borrow. I get to loot, really. I really feel like I get to thieve things that are around me because I have been put in a unique position, and it's so incredibly unique that a whole culture has been built around it.
Hell yes, I am.
My studies lean on capturing contemporary languages in the mediums they present themselves, negotiating flexibilities in language, and highlighting temporal drags that are culturally accepted colloquially. Essentially, what that means is like, temporal drags are, I feel like English is a language of assumption. And so that to me is considered a temporal drag in language. But they're culturally accepted as, it's almost like English language, in my opinion, is the language of assumption. And in the language of assumption, when people are communicating with others, we just like place what we think that they mean off of what they said. And I'm really interested in words put in proximity to one another that we've just decided are colloquially acceptable in the contemporary. And I'm also interested in how words play a role in how the world is perceived. And I always think of like the intro to Baby Boy, and I always think about words like, oh, I'm about to go to my mama's crib. Just this idea of like crib and like what the crib actually is, you know, like to a baby, or this idea of like baby boy, not like an adult male. There's just like so many phrases that we have. And so someone can say, oh, well, you know what I mean. But like sometimes I often think like, but do I actually know what you mean? And even if I did say like, yes, I do know what you mean, I do feel like there is something special about being able to articulate yourself concisely. And not only concisely, but also like specific to the culture you occupy and specific to the social groups you decide to be a part of, which made me realize there's like the English language as a theme, and then the many English languages that occupy themselves because we live in America, which is a huge melting pot due to colonialism. So yeah, and also I was a little bit stressed out today, you know, like I'm grateful to be in the position that I am in. However, I constantly am internally battling back and forth with what should be said and what should be kept to myself. I also realize that in many spaces that are predominantly non-Black, that if I imagine like if there were more of us in these spaces, it wouldn't be beneficial to the school, because it would, in my eyes, would be like revolution. Because this idea of like critical thinking, like we were going through the syllabuses today, and it was like, don't be disruptive, or like, don't be disrespectful. But those are all subjective, because in my mind, you know, then the next thing we talk about is like, you know, the practice of critical thinking. But for me, like the practice of critical thinking has the capacity to be disruptive and to be perceived as disrespect as people are going through like growth. So I don't know. I'm excited for this semester, but I am getting a little bit like yeah, I think there's just like this tad bit of frustration, but also like this extreme curiosity for what I'm going to create and bring to the table. My overall goal is to create works that sparks and ignites conversation, to get people to actually begin like thinking about ways that they think, not ways that I think, but that they think. My overall motto is like, no, you sit with it. Like I've already sat with a lot of these things, so it's just like, now it's your turn to sit with it. Because I'm always sitting with things in class, and in spaces, and as much as I talk, there's still so much more that I could say. So I'm really in this space of just acquiring more ideas, more knowledge, more information, more skills, more techniques, so that I could begin speaking louder with my work. Yeah, I don't know. It's giving it's giving this nigga is tired. It's giving this nigga is tired, but this nigga is shit. I was reading this on the bus today. This is like my third time reading this essay, and it's so excellent, called My Black Death by Arthur Jafa. And let me see. There's just so much good stuff in this essay. It's essentially like this evidence of blackness without a black being actually being present, but it's also about the presence of blackness when a black being is present, but the blackness is of an alien culture, or is of alienation, or is like a thing, or is just something that is like identified as like this darkness, which ironically is so interesting, because I was reading this and started thinking about Lovecraft Country, and thinking about like in the instances when the black characters were faced with like whiteness, racism, and monsters, how the tears of fear, the whiteness was still up here and the monsters were down here. And it's like they could tackle the monsters. It's like they could figure that out. But like whiteness was still something that was just like, word, like you're still like this, even in the midst of like monstrosity in these spaces. And yeah, it's just something to consistently talk about. These are always like consistent like themes that I've seen in films. And I'm always thinking like, am I thinking too deeply about these shows or these films? But I don't think so. I feel like I am plagued by critical thinking. Shout out to bell hooks.